Business Conduct based in Turkey at the OECD Istanbul Center. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's launch session of the OECD training on due diligence and responsible business conduct in agriculture supply chains in the Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey. This training is organized as part of the regional program, Responsible Business Conduct for Sustainable Development in the Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey. And before we continue, I would like to share some housekeeping notes that you will see on the slides as well. First of all, please make sure to stay muted during the session and to keep your camera on to increase the interactiveness of today's discussions. We ask you to kindly rename your Zoom title with your name and organization so we also have an idea of who's joined us today. Please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen to select English or Arabic interpretation, noting that today's speakers will be speaking in English. If you have any questions or comments, please share them in the session chat at any time. We'll make sure to take a few minutes to discuss and share your insights at the end of today's discussions. This launch session has three objectives. The first is to explore the key risks, challenges, and opportunities around responsible business conduct that businesses face in Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Tunisia, and Turkey. It also aims to introduce the due diligence requirements for firms in the region, as well as give an overview of the OECD standards on responsible business conduct, or RBC, and due diligence. And finally, it seeks to explain why RBC and due diligence is becoming increasingly more significant and relevant for agri-food supply chains in MENA and Turkey. To do so, Nicolas Haché, Head of Regional Programs at the OECD Center for Responsible Business Conduct, will first introduce the MENA and Turkey regional program, as well as the importance and relevance of RBC within the agricultural sector in the region. Afterwards, Sofia Gnick, Policy Lead at the OECD Center for RBC, will present the OECD instruments on RBC in the agricultural sector. After this, we're delighted to invite two regional experts who will each introduce us to one of the major issues in the agriculture supply chain. The first on water scarcity and the second on child and labor rights. Lastly, as I mentioned before, we will have some time for questions and discussions and a few closing remarks. Nicolas, over to you.
Thank you, Dylan, and good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the launch of the OECD training on due diligence and responsible business conduct in agricultural supply chains in MENA and Turkey. Today's webinar will be an occasion to discuss challenges and opportunities for responsible business conduct in the agriculture sector in the region, before the deep dive training sessions, which will focus on specific aspects of due diligence in this sector. I am pleased to welcome such a diverse audience with representatives of businesses, industry associations, government, sustainability initiatives, civil society, workers' association, and academia. Your presence today signals your commitment to sustainable business practices. This event is part of the OECD's RBC MENA plus T program, titled Responsible Business Conduct for Sustainable Development in the Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey. It includes the countries of the region adhering to OECD standards on responsible business conduct and due diligence, which are Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Tunisia, and Turkey. And I extend our sincere gratitude to the governments of Germany and Switzerland for their financial support for this program. Now, allow me to say a few words about the economic importance of the agricultural sector for the region and why you should be interested in responsible business conduct. The agricultural sector is a key driver for economic growth, employment, and social development in the countries I mentioned. The MENA and Turkey region exported over $48.8 billion worth of agricultural products in 2023. 29.7% of these exports went to the European Union, a major trade partner for the broader region. In 2023, In Tunisia and Morocco, agricultural exports to the EU accounted for 52% and 62% respectively of total agricultural exports, while the EU accounted for 21.7% of total agricultural exports in Egypt and 25.5% in Turkey. So the agricultural industry is not only an economic pillar in the region, but it's also vital for the livelihoods and well-being of millions. The sector is a major source of employment, accounting for up to 28 and 30% in Egypt and Morocco, respectively. However, the sector's activities can also be associated with a number of adverse human rights and labor impacts. Key challenges include a high degree of informality. For example, as much as 94% of employment in agriculture in Jordan and 98% in Egypt is informal. As agriculture often involves family and smallholder farming, the sector is at high risk for child labor. It might also pay below living wage and harbor other human rights risks. Environmental impacts, such as increased water stress, pose further challenges as the region's available water is projected to decline by up to 45% by the end of the century. Given these significant economic contributions and associated challenges, the sustainability of the agricultural sector is key to make a meaningful contribution to sustainable development, and expectations globally are rising. The OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises on responsible business conduct are important to respond to these challenges. The guidelines are the most comprehensive government-backed standard on responsible business conduct, and they're addressed to businesses. The guidelines cover all areas of business sustainability, including human rights, labor rights, environment, anti-corruption, and some more. As of today, 52 countries are committed to implementing this instrument. These 52 countries represent 2/3 of global trade, and this includes Turkey as an OECD member and also non-OECD member countries such as Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, and Tunisia. The expectation that businesses carry out risk-based due diligence to identify, address, and mitigate adverse impacts of their operations and supply chains is a key element of responsible business conduct. And to help companies meet the due diligence expectations laid out in the guidelines, the OECD and the Food and Agriculture Organization have developed practical guidance for businesses operating in the agricultural supply chains. The guidelines and the OECD FAO guidance for responsible agricultural supply chains are voluntary instruments for businesses. However, the due diligence expectations are increasingly making their way into binding laws in Europe, the Americas, and the Asia Pacific. Currently, 75% of OECD countries have implemented some form of regulation on sustainability due diligence in the supply chains based on OECD standards. These countries are adopting binding rules on sustainable supply chains and are major trades and economic partners for the MENA region and Turkey. Let me give you some examples. The EU, for example, has issued a host of due diligence-related regulations and accounts for up to 59% of individual trade volumes and 85% of foreign direct investment. Turkey, as an OECD and G20 economy, maintains close ties with the EU through the customs union. In 2023, Egypt attracted the highest foreign direct investment inflows in Africa, much of which comes from OECD countries, including those promoting responsible business conduct. 71% of investment agreements concluded by G20 countries since 2019 contain provisions on RBC. And both financial markets and consumers are also integrating sustainability considerations in their purchasing or investment decisions. Both OECD and non-OECD members have established mandatory sustainability-related disclosure requirements for listed companies, including in Egypt and Turkey. Responsible business conduct standards are key to harness and highlight the contribution of the private sector to address risks and advance sustainable development. The private sector employs the most workers and creates the majority of value added in most economies. Enhancing the sustainability of business operations is therefore crucial to advancing on the Sustainable Development Goals. Scaling up responsible business conduct means strengthening a key enabler of sustainable development. And we are launching this training under the MENA Türkiye Responsible Business Conduct Program to support businesses towards greater sustainability and more responsible supply chains. This training is designed to enhance understanding of risk-based due diligence and identify, avoid, and mitigate adverse impacts in the conduct of your operations using OECD tools and knowledge. Today, we provide practical insights from our speakers and introduce the tools to support your due diligence efforts. The session kicks off a 5-part series, including 3 deep dives in June and the closing session. We are committed to making this training useful and relevant for you, providing tools that you can apply between and after the deep dives. I encourage you to actively participate by sharing your questions, good practices, and lessons learned throughout the training program, and I look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nicolas, for setting the scene on the evidently growing significance of responsible business conduct in the region. Next, I would like to welcome my colleague Sophia to the floor, who will introduce us to the OECD instruments that are essential in conducting responsible business conduct for sustainable agriculture supply chains. Sophia, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Dylan. Good morning to everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you here today. And I'm really looking forward to conducting the training that will be taking place over the coming weeks. This morning, I'm going to do a brief introduction to our standards and the core components and characteristics of due diligence as a bit of a background to the upcoming training. So the OECD is an international organization made up of 38 member countries. We're well known predominantly for our data collection and analysis, but we're also a standard setting body. The standards that I'm going to be talking about today, as Nicolas mentioned, are authoritative government-backed international standards adhered to and promoted by Morocco, Tunisia, Jordan, Egypt, and Turkey, and are very much part of government policy. The Center for Responsible Business Conduct, and you'll often hear us referring to it as RBC, just to shorten it and cut it down because it's a long name, is the guardian of OECD's standards on responsible business conduct and supply chain due diligence. And these standards are adhered to and promoted by all OECD members, but also many non-member governments. There are 3 main standards or references that I wanted to talk you through today. The first, as we heard from Nicolas, is the OECD Guidelines for Multinational Enterprises on Responsible Business Conduct, which help business understand what issues and risks that they need to be addressing in their operations and supply chains, including everything from environment to human rights, taxation, technology, and labor issues. So it goes a lot broader than traditional sustainability themes that we often hear about. The guidelines will be 50 years old next year, so they very much stood the test of time, but they're updated regularly. And the last one update, which took place in 2023, really reflected the new challenges that are being faced by business, including on issues such as climate change and biodiversity loss. The second key instrument that I wanted to point you towards is the OECD Due Diligence Guidance for Responsible Business Conduct. Now, this is a process-based standard that focuses on how businesses should be going about assessing, addressing, and reporting on the risks that are covered in the OECD guidelines throughout their operations and their supply chains. And lastly, given the unique challenges that and opportunities that are faced by the agricultural sector, we developed a joint guidance with FAO on responsible agricultural supply chains, which speaks to the specific issues faced by businesses acting within agricultural supply chains. The training that we will be conducting over the coming weeks for businesses and industry associations will focus on due diligence as explained within the OECD FAO guidance, so very much tailored to agribusiness. The guidance was finalized and published in 2016 in English, and it's since been translated into 15 different languages, including Arabic. As well as unpacking the due diligence process for agricultural supply chains, it includes, very helpfully, a model enterprise policy on RBC, suggestions for actions that can address risks in your operations and supply chains, and support on how to meaningfully engage with communities and indigenous peoples. The OECD FAO guidance also builds on a number of other internationally recognized standards, as well as the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. These include the FAO's voluntary guidelines on responsible governance of tenure, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and various ILO conventions. This is a really important strength of the standard because it helps business ensure that they're aligning across a range of different international instruments and expectations. Lastly, I wanted to point to a number of different resources and tools that that the OECD has developed to help business implement their due diligence processes. We're continually developing resources and information for business that sometimes targets even specific commodity sectors. So for example, we recently published 3 thematic handbooks for business. The first being a handbook on due diligence in the cocoa sector on addressing child labour and forced labour. Now, although it's tailored to the cocoa sector where this is particularly challenging, a lot of the information and resources and materials within that handbook can also be used by businesses operating in other commodity supply chains. The OECD FAO Business Handbook on Deforestation and Due Diligence in Agricultural Supply Chains. And lastly, the Handbook on Living Income and Living Wage in the Garment and Agricultural Sector. The handbooks provide clarity on how to undertake due diligence for specific risks, and they promote a common understanding of risks and impacts in supply chains. They contain very practical information and tips for business, references to existing resources that are available to companies, and recommendations that are transferable, as I said, to other sectors and commodities. And as Nicola mentioned, with the increase in regulation around due diligence and responsible business conduct, we've been seeing increasing demand for these types of resources. At this point, I'm going to hand back to Dylan, who will introduce our expert speakers.
Yes, thank you, Sophia. So now we just heard about the OECD instruments and materials around RBC. We will now have an interactive side as well. And to do so, we will have an audience survey using Mentimeter that will allow to capture some of the issues that you face day to day within the MENA and Türkiye region. To do so, we would like to ask you to join through your phone or your computer through one of 3 options. The first is to scan the QR code using your phone. That will bring you straight to the audience survey, and then you will be able to respond to the questions there. The second option is to go to menti.com and enter the code 21708839. And the third option is to click the link in the chat that was just shared by colleagues at the OECD RBC Center. That will also direct you straight to the Mentimeter. These questions are self-paced. So the idea would be that as we listen to our 2 regional experts in a moment, and that they share their arguments and some of the issues that they're working on, perhaps this will also crystallize some of the ideas in your head and also enable you to fulfill the questions in more detail. So there are 3 main questions. The first is to identify the drivers for sustainable practices and RBC due diligence in the region. The second question is, what are the main sustainability issues you encounter in agri-food supply chains? This is more really the practical application of what you face in the day-to-day lives. And third is, what actions are you taking to address these risks? So to already see what is happening from your side, let's say. The fourth question is just to capture some more questions or insights that you may have. But again, feel free to do that either through Mentimeter or in the Zoom chat. Once we listen to our speakers, we will actually go back to Sophia, who will then discuss some of the results and also look at how the OECD due diligence framework, so the 5 steps that we just heard very briefly about, can help address some of these risks. So really bringing it to the practical level. With this said, I would now like to welcome Dr. Youssef Brouzine to the floor, who will give us a deep dive on water issues in MENA from an agriculture point of view. Dr. Brouzine is the regional representative for the MENA region at the International Water Management Institute. Dr. Brouzine, the floor is yours. Don't hesitate to share when you want to go to the next slide, and we'll make sure to accommodate.
Thank you, Dylan. Do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Brilliant, brilliant. Hi, Dylan. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be with you here today. And thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to discuss with you and also with your community about these important issues and about this interesting and timely program and training that you are offering. So yes, I'm Dr. Youssef Brouzine. I represent IMI, which is the International Water Management Institute, an international non-profit research for development organization focused on sustainability resilience in water and in connection with the other sectors, including agriculture. And in the next few minutes, I will be triggering or reflecting with you quickly about some key topics when it comes to the risks coming from climate and water system facing agricultural operations and supply chains in the Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey, but also what are the opportunities that are there for these players and other stakeholders. So in the next slide, I will be introducing the situation that probably we all know about water stress in this region. So we all know that MENA region is one of the climate change, but also water scarcity hotspots in the world. According to the WRI Institute, they are classifying the countries over 3 groups. So in the first group, where we have almost or more than 80% of fresh water is used, they call it extremely high baseline water stressed countries. So we have 10 MENA countries. In the second group, where fresh water is consumed at more than 40%, we have 7 plus Turkey, of course. So you can see that most of the Middle East, North Africa region, in addition to Turkey, are under a very critical and difficult water situation. These figures are for national situation, and you can imagine that, and you can understand that the situation is uneven within the same country. So we have even some regions in these countries that are under more, let's say, challenging water situation. And by chance, unfortunately, most of these regions within these countries are growing areas. And you might understand why and how it is interacting with the agriculture system. And the next slide, I will be talking about the water variability. So we talked about the limited amount of water and challenging amount of water. Now we'll talk about variability, time variability. So having less water is an issue, but having inconsistent supply, natural supply of water is another issue for all vital systems, but of course, mainly for agriculture. So when we have variability from month to month or from year to year, season to season, it's very challenging to manage when it comes to consistent agriculture operations, consistent growing activities for both rain-fed, but also for irrigated agriculture. Unfortunately, the MENA region and Turkey are one of the hotspots, as you can see, of the water variability issue. Next slide, please, where probably I will be combining the 2 issues. Or before that, here I'm talking about drought. Yes, this is it. Thank you. So here I'm combining the 2 issues. So you can imagine how risky is the situation when it comes to less water, but also high variability, which is the frame at your top left-hand side, where we have most of the Middle East and North Africa region, unfortunately. Exactly, thank you. So we have low precipitation, which is the main source of fresh water, but also low variability from season to season. Okay, so this risk is very important, and there are solutions. Obviously, there are options to increase resilience, and we will touch on them. Turkey is also part of the low precipitation countries with little bit some slightly improved or enhanced or better situation when it comes to variability, but the growing areas in Turkey as not exactly as the rest of the Middle East and North Africa region. High variability and low water availability. Next slide, please. And probably in the next slide, I think I will be talking about droughts, which is a reality in this region. Drought / or plus heat waves, very big challenge to the agricultural operations and growing activities in this region. And as you can see, most of the growing areas actually are hit by this issue in the MENA region. In the next slide, I will be probably talking about seeing what is going on now currently, which is part, as I said, part of our normal, part of our reality. Unfortunately, the future is not in better shape. In your left-hand side, few graphic representations capturing MENA and Turkey about some projections under two scenarios, projections of temperature. So you can see that most of the scenarios say that there will be an increase of temperature, and you can imagine the impacts on plants, crops, and all the growing activity. To your right-hand side, you can see a projection of water, precipitation in the future on over Africa, but we can focus on North Africa as example. And you can see that it is brown or orange. It means that there will be a deficit, a decrease in terms of precipitation. So the future is not really promising, but this is not the end of the world, of course. We are here to talk about how to increase resilience, and this is why we have this program, this training, and all the activity and activities offered by OECD. The next slide. I will be, I'm just reflecting on the situation of Turkey. So the red line is about the increase of temperature that is expected in Turkey, and the blue line means the drop in terms of precipitation. So basically, we have the same situation as the other Middle East and North Africa countries. The next slide. Yes, so we talked about what's going to happen in terms of temperature, what's going to happen in terms of offer or supply of fresh water, basically precipitation. In the other side, we have the use, we have the demand to come up with stress, which is water stress. It means it reflects on the amount of water that is used to satisfy economic activities. And of course, agriculture is the largest user, and agriculture is our focus today. So you can see that it is expected that the water stress should increase. So the orange, pink, or red color mean an increase in terms of water stress. And you can see that most of the Middle East and North Africa region, also Turkey, will be under this situation. That will be an issue, but also an opportunity for the agricultural operations to do business in a responsible way and resilient way, of course. In the next slide, I will be yes, these are some of the research analysis results done on few strategic crops in the Mediterranean region, in the Middle East, and also Turkey. So you can see the crops at your left-hand side, and then some explanation. I will not go into details. I'm sure you can get access to this information, or our colleagues from OECD can share the presentation. But I highlighted in red what's going to happen in brief. So you can see a lot of decrease in yield, shift in terms of growing calendar, a disruption in terms of physiological activity like bud flowering, germination, etc., and also increase in terms of irrigation demand. So most of the analysis and experimentation and also modeling works say that this is what's going to happen. for most of the strategic crops that we are growing here in the region. So adaptation, resilience, and action is needed. And I think it is the subject of the next slide. Indeed. So here I'm having the some of the stakeholders, key stakeholders in the agriculture system, and what are the opportunities for everyone? What are the roles of everyone in making agriculture operations and also the related supply chain more resilient and responsible? Quickly, I will start from the left-hand side. Distributors and retailers of agri-inputs, for example, are really key players in the middle between growers or growing companies, but also suppliers and manufacturers. So they can pass technologies. They can also bring feedback from the ground. They can also coach and transfer practices and good practices and resilient solutions. And the next segment or player or stakeholder group, we have the international corporate and private research and development operators. So innovations in terms of, for example, efficient or conservation irrigation, genetics. They bring also genetic solutions to make the crops more resilient or tolerant to heat waves or demanding less water for irrigation, for example, or more tolerant to pests and part of the integrated pest management solutions. Growers or growing corporates, of course, the big player. So adopting the resilient solutions like irrigation efficiency technologies, like early warning systems, digital solutions, the right varieties, the right crop management practices, but also assessing risks before to invest, before to go and or grow. So risks regarding water availability, as we've seen, regarding the possible climate calendar that we will be having and its impact on the crops or the current varieties. So using science, using technologies, and also cooperation is very important. And the growers are in the middle of the value chain, and they are the biggest player, let's say, and they have really big roles, but also a lot of opportunities. Academia and all incubation programs bring in some scientific ways of looking at issues or to solve issues, helping also students and startups to focus on some innovations to bring resilience to the farming systems under these risks and challenges, but also catalyzing discussion, cooperation between all stakeholders are some of the roles and opportunities for academia and all incubation and acceleration programs. International corporation, international organizations, development agencies like OECD and others, they are here also to bring evidences, but also to look at things from different angles and bring everyone on the table and also directing everyone into the right solutions. And I think this is what is about today. And then the government agencies and governments in general. So they should put in place policies and also institutional setups to accommodate innovation. Incentives, for example, to innovators, to startups, SMEs, all private sector, for example, to adopt, for example, conservation irrigation technologies to make irrigation more efficient. The right varieties, the right greenhouse technologies, for example, and also the right supply chain setups, for example. Governments can also help in putting in place insurance solutions, for example, incentives. So the government agencies should really play a big role in making agriculture resilient and responsible in the best way when it comes to adaptation to these risks, but also with the less.
Apologies,
less
Dr. Bouzy. Apologies for time. Could we ask to wrap up in 30 seconds, 1 minute, please? Thank you.
I will. So the government can also put in place laws and regulations to make the business more responsible when it comes to the water footprint, the land, the impact on land and other natural resources. So now I will go to my last slide, where I will be trying to throw some ideas that I'm sure will be also part of the discussion afterward. So probably you noticed that I mentioned digital solutions. Digital solutions can help in assessing risks, for example, before to invest, but also while investing and making the day-to-day operations more resilient and responsible when it comes to land, water, air, energy consumption, etc. Private sector has a big role in terms of agility in action, bringing solutions from elsewhere as well, and thinking and also helping the other stakeholders to be in the same resilience and responsibility level. Emerging business models are there. A lot of opportunities in Turkey and the Middle East and North Africa region. We talk about nature-based solutions now. A lot of investments opportunities there. Regenerative agriculture to make soils health reality in the face of climate change and water scarcity. And then we have climate finance and green investments. Again, a lot of opportunities there, again, to help the resilience by leveraging on climate finance solutions. Cooperation and partnership with the public agencies, with communities, but also with private sector. And we've seen how governments have a lot to do and lots of opportunities for them. And capacity building is really key, dynamic capacity building to adapt with the reality. And we've seen that there will be some shift changes in climate, in water, and also in the behavior of crops. So we need to be really up to date in terms of technicalities. And thank you very much. Looking forward to the discussion afterward.
Thank you, Dr. Bouzim, for this spotlight on some of the major issues facing the region, but also giving us some hope and some optimism in what can be done about it. I want to say we were very lucky to catch Dr. Bouzim because he informed us this was his sixth speaking intervention this week, and it's only Wednesday morning. But we were equally lucky to catch our next speaker, who will introduce in a moment. But before so, I would like to just remind our participants to join us either through the QR code or by clicking the link in the Zoom chat, or going to menti.com and entering the code on the screen to also fill in the audience survey to capture some of the day-to-day realities that you might be facing within agri-food supply chains in the region. This said, I would like to welcome Marwa Salah Abdu to the floor. We're informed that she just returned from field visits as well to Egypt. So as I mentioned, lucky to have her today. Marwa is the National Project Manager for Child Labor Projects in Egypt, working at the ILO's Cairo office. Marwa will introduce us to the activities and achievements on combating child labor in Egyptian supply chains, particularly in the jasmine and cotton sector, as well as looking at what the ILO is doing on inclusive multi-stakeholder engagement and their due diligence processes. Thank you, Marwa, for joining us today. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Dallin, and thank you all, and thank you, Nicola. It's a pleasure being with you, and glad to participate in this training. It's really timely and important to get prepared for what's next. So next slide, please. Okay. The main question here is, are your businesses ready for the new human rights due diligence regulations? This is the main question in the meantime, based on the previous presentation that we heard today, that most of the exports are for the European Union. And talking about the European Union, so talking about the act or the regulations for the due diligence, the human rights due diligence. Next slide, please. Talking about this, we should be ready. We should be taking care of our supply chains. Now, if we are talking about business, if we are talking about agribusiness, we are talking about complex supply chains. Here, I'm giving an example, but it's not the in the agribusiness to avoid any sensitivities, but talking about if we are not respecting what was discussing since the beginning of the training, and we are talking about the business conduct So this will affect the reputation of the brand, of the supplier, and the country we are sourcing of. Talking about my country, this is, next slide, please. This will be talking about my country and my organization. Here, what we are talking about, the essence of everything and reinforcing each other, all the regulatory framework for the human rights. I will start from the fundamental principles in rights at work, which is the main core standards and the fundamental standards for the ILO. So we are talking about that worker is not a commodity. Employees are not a commodity. They are human beings and they have rights to be respected. When we are talking about this, we are talking about main fundamental principles that we cannot talk about one alone. So although I'm managing a project for combating child labor, but we never find the child labor as a standalone issue. It's always blended with the other violations for other fundamentals. So there is always ties between the occupational safety and health and the availability or the potentially that we have a child labor risks, maybe the worst forms of a child labor. So the main fundamentals that we discuss now is the freedom of association, the elimination of the forced labor, the abolishing of a child labor, elimination of discrimination, and safe and healthy work environment, which is OSH. Moving from this and reaching the enforcing of the human rights for due diligence in 2027, it's really timely to get ready about this. Next slide, please. Why we do care about this as ILO? We do care about this because to ensure the human rights due diligence policies and the processes are effectively supported and enforced, this will help us to reach the social justice, will help us to reach the decent work that ILO is all about. Next slide, please. The due diligence is already covered, so we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, what are the costs if we are not doing or paying care of the due diligence? And here, I would like to give two main examples from Egypt. Usually, we care about the whole supply chain. It's starting from the informal sector, as colleagues before me mentioned this, to the high-end brands and the markets. Next slide, please. Talking about this, what's in it for me as a business? It is for me to reduce the reputational risks, to enhance the stakeholder engagement, to be committed to the corporate social responsibility, ensure legal compliance, improve operational efficiency, and contribute to sustainable and business models. Okay, from Egypt, how this is ensured or implemented? We have two examples. The first supply chain is the cotton supply chain, and the second supply chain is the jasmine supply chain. So last year, we were triggered by media for child labor findings in the jasmine supply chain. What we found on the ground that we should start with an assessment to see what is the reality, what's going on. For this, I would like to thank all the suppliers, all the brands, all the fragrance house for taking this seriously, because it's about business. When we speak about business, it's not only for employers, but also for workers. It's also the reputation of the country. So since we knew this, what was done on the ground? First, there were a coalition for jasmine involving everyone. And this will be very much ties to the enhance the stakeholder engagement to come together to stand up for an issue. And then we classify the problem. As I mentioned, it's not a child labor alone. It's usually violations comes together. So what we found that since jasmine is picked overnight, so the first thing we thought about is to have, and again, thanks for the suppliers, that we would like to have a night monitors going in all the fields and affiliated to each supply chain or each supplier, and checking what is the reality, what is the reality of child labor, what the reality of being committed to the occupational safety and health, the PPEs or the personal protection equipment, and so on. Then, after knowing what is going on the ground and talking that we are in informal sector, so we found that going to support those families and those workers should be integrated. Integrated means that we should work upstream and downstream. Downstream directly with them, we work it and we dig deep about what is their problem. And in this season, we are working to have a living wage through the ILO methodology for setting a living wage and bringing everyone together through a social dialogue based on evident by numbers, by the consumption, by the national statistics as well for the expenditure, and to know exactly the fair price that will cover the decent living wage for them. In addition to this, we are working with the target group or the picker themselves and the collector in the supply chain in order to change their economic status, to make them having a say, to make them a better living standard. And this is through financial literacy program, through economic empowerment, through reaching out to them, through facilitating the access to finance and to the governmental services. And this is very linked to the previous presentation when we said that everyone has a role. The government has a role, the private sector has a role, but the target group themselves should help us help them the right way. Since we are talking mainly about children, so also what we did for children together with the suppliers, and by this I'm talking about a consolidated efforts together. So each supplier, each brand are supporting a number of children, as well as the ILO, as well as the governmental entities, to be rehabilitated, to check their presence and absence of the absenteeism of the schools, ensure that they are getting back to school, ensure that they are rehabilitated and they have free spaces to express themselves. This couldn't be done alone without strengthening the child protection mechanisms on the ground for them. And this is what actually on the ground. So when I say we, it's the governmental representative, the National Council for Childhood and Motherhood, it's the Ministry of Social Solidarity to check the conditional cash transfers and how they can better support the families. I'm talking also about the brands and about the suppliers themselves. Given that we are in MENA region, so we are talking also about tradition. So awareness and advocacy are making great difference in here. So this is the commitment of everyone to do something. Next slide, please. When we know about that there is violations and why we care. For example, as I mentioned, in the jasmine supply chain, there were already mobilization on the ground. This mobilization was also triggered by media, by a BBC documentary last year. But actually, for us, this was not a challenge. For all involved in here, this was an opportunity to and eye-opener to dig deeper and see what are the problems. But are we waiting for this for other supply chains? Now we are talking about jasmine, but we can say the same for hazelnut. Away from the agribusiness, we can talk about the same for mining. We can talk about all the supply chain, and if you go deeper, the lower the supply chain, you will find more violations since it's not formalized. So it's not only media. Media could be a trigger and could be opportunity, but also the audits, the assessments, the inspection, the responsibility of each tier and each tier in the supply chain to look down the supply chain and ensure traceability and ensure that we are doing the due diligence and ensure the fundamental principles and rights at work of the lower tier of the supply chain. Also, it's an eye-opener for us when there is complaints from worker. And for this, what's in it and what is the responsibility for the employers is at the first place to have encouraging compliance and complaint system or grievance mechanism in place. And actually, this will take me to the cotton. When we start working on the cotton in the Excel Africa project, this was one strong channel that we pursue, or one strong track, and this was for children that were there in the dual education system, and we found to them a grievance system and tracking system, so they can talk if there is a problem. But it's not only children, it's for everyone to ensure that they can have a safe space to talk about complaints, to be heard when they say this, and for the employer to respect at the first place the fundamental principles and rights at work. Next slide, please.
Marva, thank you so much. Just asking to wrap up in the next 30 seconds if that's possible.
Sure,
thank you.
Sure. So this is how we can start, is to embed responsible business conduct in all our operations, to start with the risk assessment and to go with the prevention mitigation measures and the regular monitors to ensure that everything's fine. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. To do this with the ILO, we cannot do this alone. It's all, if it's a labor rights, if a labor-related issue, it should go through a social dialogue. It's the business associations, the worker associations, is to come together and discuss what is possible and what is the action plan for everyone. By this, by improving the working condition, we can talk about combating child labor, combating forced labor, but not as standalone issues, or not to talk about anything alone. By this, the main takeaway is to work together, is to discuss together, is to take immediate action, because there is no tomorrow in business if I will not plant the seeds from now. Thank you, and it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Marva. I'd also like to thank again Dr. Bouzine for his intervention, but who had to leave for another meeting today. That brings us actually to the discussion of the Mentimeter results. I saw we had around 40 participants that responded, so quite a nice collection. Sophia, would you like to walk us through some of the insights captured today?
And I also wanted to say a huge thank you to the speakers, because I think they did a brilliant job of kind of covering a lot of different issues. I loved the focus on engaging everyone within the supply chain, from production to retail, and the key role of everyone there, but also the variation in different activities that need to be done. Everything from kind of night monitors to really technical R&D in agricultural inputs to grievance mechanisms. So I thought they were great. Just to quickly touch on the Mentimeter results, I think we've got some fascinating feedback here to build on. A real variation in the kind of main drivers for more sustainable practices in the region. First and foremost being climate change, somewhat probably unsurprisingly, as this is a key risk and a key challenge for business, and you know, everything that Dr. Youssef was touching on there. But then, you know, something slightly quite different in second place, being the regulation in export markets being a real driver, and obviously kind of the changes within EU policy and regulation. But then, you know, third, and equal to regulation in markets, but is wanting to be a sustainable and ethical business, and realizing that this is actually part of, you know, a key part of doing business nowadays. And then a number of other kind of things that issues being flagged and drivers being flagged after that. In terms of the main sustainability risks that you're seeing in the region, water scarcity is the top one, child labor, but there are also a range of other ones: lack of digitalization, animal welfare, lower yields, irrigation shortages, lack of transparency, informality. I think this really shows the diversity of issues that are being faced by agribusiness in the region. And it's important to note that the OECD FAO guidance, as well as the MENA guidelines, do touch on all of these issues in different ways. And so they're really important resources when it comes to better understanding how to assess and address some of these risks. And then lastly, we've seen a range of different actions that are already being taken by business and actors within the region, supplier trainings and awareness raisings, different technology systems for managing water consumption, rainwater harvesting, drip irrigation, etc., but also reassuringly collaboration across different stakeholders with universities, international organizations, NGOs, and developing joint initiatives, which is great to see because that is also a key part of the due diligence process. So now I'll just quickly cover my last few slides and go back to our main presentation. Can you let me know if you're seeing that correctly, Dylan?
Yes, we can see your presentation again.
Fab. Okay, wonderful. So I wanted to kind of briefly introduce the actual due diligence process, highlighting that the training that will be carried out over the next few weeks will really be a beginner level training and an introduction to due diligence. We won't deep dive into every aspect and nuance, but give you a solid foundation to build on, that you can then continue to learn through various e-learnings that we have online, and other trainings that we will deliver. The OECD FAO guidance due diligence framework is really about adapting your business models so that you can identify, assess, mitigate risks, and prevent impacts, such as those that we've just heard about from our two speakers, both in your own operations and those of your supply chains, of your suppliers within your supply chains. Due diligence within the OECD FAO guidance is broken down into 5 steps. These steps are ongoing and iterative. You start by establishing a strong corporate policy on responsible business conduct and the relevant management systems. You then map, identify, assess, and prioritize the risks in your operations and in your supply chains. You design and implement a strategy to address these risks and impacts. And these can include some of the strategies that we heard about from our great speakers just now. And then you verify that your strategy is working and having an impact. And finally, you publicly report on your due diligence strategy. It's an iterative process because what you learn from conducting those 5 steps then goes back into further adapting and tailoring your corporate policy and your management systems. So it should really be a very dynamic, ongoing process. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to hold 3 deep dive trainings. Deep dive 1 will focus on steps 1 and 2 of the due diligence process. Deep dive 2 will cover step 3 on prevention, mitigation, and remedy, which is quite a big one. And then the final deep dive will cover steps 4 and 5. Lastly, I wanted to just flag another element of due diligence which gets a little bit less coverage. The due diligence wheel or cycle that I just showed you is an infographic that a lot of people are very familiar with. However, the key characteristics of due diligence, which I'll talk about now, really form the backbone and capture the spirit of the due diligence guidance. And they ensure that due diligence is credible and effective, and helping you go from your paper corporate policy to your risk assessment to action on the ground. And this can be a really daunting step for business once they realize the extent of risks that are within their supply chain. As we saw from that wonderful word cloud in the Mentimeter, all the different kind of issues that are coming up. The core characteristics of due diligence help ensure that the OECD standards adapt to the individual circumstances of the enterprise and are practically implementable. And I'll run through a few of them, not all of them, that appear in kind of three main buckets. So the first is really on the approach. Due diligence is preventative. It's about prevention. The purpose of due diligence is first and foremost to avoid causing or contributing to adverse impacts and harms on people, the environment, and society. It's only when impacts then take place that business are responsible for remediating those impacts. Due diligence is commensurate with risk. This means that your due diligence process should be in proportion to the severity and the likelihood of the risks, and should be adapted to the nature of the potential harm. This means that where risks of, for example, child labor or human rights violations are high, then your due diligence process should be more extensive. While where the likelihood and severity of risks is a lot lower, your due diligence can be reduced. And due diligence can also involve prioritization. So where it's not feasible for a business to address all the identified risks at once, an enterprise can prioritize in which order it takes action. But this should very much be based on the severity and likelihood of risks and impacts, where the most significant impacts are dealt with first, and then enterprises can move on to address those that are less significant. Due diligence is appropriate to an enterprise's circumstances. So the nature and extent of due diligence can be affected by factors such as the size of the enterprise, if you're an SME, for example, the context of the operations, your business model, and your position within the supply chain. Lastly, one of the points I'll touch on is that communication and engagement, where due diligence, and we heard this from Marva, is really informed by engagement with stakeholders. Stakeholders are persons or groups who have interests that could be affected by business activities. It's about two-way communication, the timely sharing of information that stakeholders need to make informed decisions, and in a way and in a format that stakeholders can understand and access. It's critical throughout the entire process of due diligence. And just to note that these kind of key characteristics of due diligence will be important points to remember throughout the entire training over the next few weeks. I will stop here. I know we're running slightly over time, so I will hand back to Dylan now.
That's fine. Thank you so much, Sophia. Now we've planned in a few moments for any questions you may have. Feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand as well if you would like to speak. This said, we did already receive a few more logistical questions. So first of all, we will be sharing the presentation, including the slides presented by our guest speakers. Secondly, both Dr. Yusuf Bruzin and Marva Salah Abdu agreed to be contacted, so they've included their email address also within the slides. So if you have any questions directed at them, don't hesitate to reach out to them. We will be sharing the slides shortly. And third, we will also be sharing a recording of today's session with those participating today, as well as on our website, so you can always share this further with your colleagues or other people that might be interested in tuning in. I see we don't have any other questions for now. So then perhaps we can move on to the more practical aspects, looking at what's coming next within the training program. So first of all, I would like to thank you all for your active participation, as well as to our esteemed speakers for joining us today, and especially for the interpreters for their hard work. I'd also like to thank our funders, SECO and GIZ, and the governments of Switzerland and Germany for the financial support within this program and making today possible. We have now all but finished the introductory session, and I hope it has been insightful and useful for you. As a reminder, the next dates for the deep dives of this training are the 3rd, 12th, and 24th of June. All three trainings will take place at the same time. This is at 10 a.m. in Paris, also 9 a.m. in Morocco and Tunisia, or 11 a.m. in Egypt, Jordan, and Turkey. Each training session takes place online, similar to today. It is interactive and will also include Arabic interpretation. The deep dives will take around 2 hours, including 15 minutes for questions and discussion. So we'll make sure to keep it under 120 minutes. I would just like to remind you that the deep dives are only open to representatives from business, industry associations, and sustainability initiatives to ensure a safe space for discussions. Eligible participants will receive a personalized Zoom link to join the deep dives, similar to the one you received today. One final call to action, which is that we have kept the registration open for the OECD training on due diligence. So for those who haven't registered yet, you can still join the rest of the training by scanning the QR code that's projected on the screen. You can also go to our website, also shared by colleagues in the chat, or click the link in the chat. Before the first deep dive next week on Tuesday, 3rd of June, we will share a welcome pack that contains the worksheets for the training, as well as useful links and information for you to look at in your own time. We also strongly recommend printing the 2-page worksheet that will come within this welcome package. That way you can also work on this during the deep dive physically. So perhaps also having 2 different colored pens will also help this exercise. Thank you again for your commitment to sustainable agriculture value chains. We look forward to welcoming the eligible participants to the next and first deep dive next Tuesday morning on the 3rd of June. Have a good rest of the day.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.